So in this video, I'm going to attempt to solve two small problems with this car. The first is that the radio doesn't have any Bluetooth, and the second is that the 12 volts cigarette lighter socket is not switched with the ignition. So if you plug something into it, even if the car is off, it will still come on straight away. So if you're going to use this for some kind of USB socket, the problem is that if you leave the car parked for a few days, you're likely to run the battery flat, because eventually this is going to just drain the power out of the battery. If you're in a hurry and you want to just skip to the how-to part, just use the chapter markers down at the bottom. Otherwise, let's get on with the video. So this Ford 6000 CD was the radio that was fitted to most Mk2 Focuses. There is a higher spec version which is branded Sony, but in fact this radio is also a Sony. It just happens to be branded Ford for some reason. And this radio was also fitted to the Mark 2.5 Focus. It just has a different faceplate on the front, so it looks a bit different, but it's actually the same thing underneath. So all of these 6000 CD radios have an aux button, and in some specs that was connected to a jack in the glove compartment, but in a lot of the cases this was just left blank. So if you turn on the radio and press the aux button, nothing actually happens, and there's no way to directly connect a radio. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the connection at the back of the radio to connect a Bluetooth module, and then when you press the aux button, it will connect to the Bluetooth module, and that will allow you to play music from your phone and send and receive calls as well. So this is the Bluetooth unit which I bought on Amazon, and it has the correct connector to fit straight into the back of the radio, so you don't need to worry about that. But you will need to splice the power cables into the power that goes into the back of the radio. And in my case, since I'm already going to be splicing the cables to take power for the Bluetooth module, I'm also going to use the opportunity to install some USB sockets in the glove box. What I've done is I've bought this. This is actually designed for motorcycles. And the idea is that you clip these terminals to the battery, and then that gives you some USB charging ports. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use this power feed to take power from where the radio gets its power, because the radio does turn on and off with the ignition. And my plan is to try and install these in the glove box here, so they'll be nice and neat and out of the way. But you know, if you do need a charging cable, you can just run one out of here. So removing the radio is pretty straightforward. We basically have to insert these little tags in with the curved end facing inwards, and then you just pull outwards and the radio just slides out. Once you pop the radio out, you can just depress the little tags and pull the little tools out. So behind here we just need to unplug the aerial cable, and then the main cable has this clip which pulls out, and you can just use that to essentially lever the cable out. Right, so I've just been doing some testing with a voltmeter, and at the moment the ignition is off, and I've got the pins in these first two holes. And if we turn the ignition now to accessory, you can see the voltage then goes up to 12 volts. So this is the one we want. This is the switched feed that only comes on when you turn the ignition on. So those are the two that we need to splice to get our power. So to remove the glove box, we have these two screws at the top here, and another two here just by the lock. And then at the bottom here you have these little tags, and under this are three more Torx screws. And then you should be able to just draw it out. Okay, so the plan is I'm going to mount this little USB thing here in the glove box. Don't want to have it too far forward because I want there to be enough space for the actual USB ports on the front. So I think probably somewhere about there. And I've had a route around and I've found two little screws that I think will work quite nicely to hold it in place. And what I'm going to do is basically just drill some pilot holes and then mount it. And then I'm also going to drill a hole at the back here to feed this cable through, so that we can feed it round to the back of the radio here. Right, so got that neatly installed there. I think it looks pretty good. That's kind of how it's going to look when it's installed. And we've got the cable running through the back here. And I'm also going to run one USB port from here to this phone mount here as well, which I'll do in a bit. And then we've just got to basically connect that up to these two cables here for the power. Okay, so I've installed a new cable for this phone mount, and I've then run it down through the dashboard, and I have cable tied it in various places to try and stop it from rattling, because there is nothing more annoying than a rattly cable while you're driving. So basically it feeds under here, and then it feeds through the back here. You can just see it going along there, and then it feeds through to come into the glove box here. And then the last bit is to splice these cables for the power. And then also I will do the Bluetooth module at the same time, because that also requires power. Right, so glove box is all back in place now, and you can see the little USB ports in there. And a little unintended consequence of me putting this here is that it actually is illuminated by this light, which is actually very handy. So if you're trying to plug in some USBs in the dark, then you can actually see what you're doing. So that's great. Okay, so I have successfully got the cables all attached in here. It's not my best work, I must be honest, but I had a bit of a struggle with this. So initially what I did was I bared a patch of cable on both of the two cables that we need to attach. And then what I tried to do was add some solder and then solder in the new connections. But the problem I was having, particularly with this negative cable, which is quite thick, is that when I was trying to add the solder, the copper in the cable was basically just conducting the heat away from the solder patch. So the solder wasn't getting hot enough to properly melt. So in the end what I did was I actually cut both of these cables and then bared them back a bit, and then I used crimps to join them and to add in the new cables that we're attaching. Would have preferred to use solder, but quite honestly I was just having such a battle with it that I gave up in the end. So one thing you'll note here is that I've offset the join points, and that's so that when the cable is all together like this, even if somehow this insulation fails, we're not going to have the two join places right next to each other, so we shouldn't have a problem with shorting. And I'm going to reapply this kind of tape that was actually originally taped around all of these, just to hold everything, and it'll probably also help stop any loose cables from rattling. So this little connector is designed to go into this hole here, and you can see if you look carefully there's a little groove in the top of this hole here, and that corresponds with this little tag on the top here. So this can only go in one way. And then that will just be held in place when you put the whole connection back into the back of the radio. Right, so here we have the microphone, which is going to be used for making calls via Bluetooth. And what I want to try and do is find somewhere in the cabin where I can basically secrete this, where it'll be fairly close to my face, so I'll get good sound quality, but also not be intrusive. I really don't want wires hanging around all over the cabin and looking ugly. My first thought is perhaps I can put it into the top of this pillar here and then run the cable down and under the dashboard to the back of the radio. One thing to point out here is this microphone that I got with this particular kit. I noticed that when I tapped it, it made a really annoying rattly noise. And of course that would be massively amplified if you were actually on the phone, because that rattle would be right where the microphone is. So what I did is I popped off the top here, and inside here you can see I've stuffed a little bit of foam down the side of the microphone just to hold it steady. And that means that when you tap it, it doesn't rattle against the side of this plastic casing. Alright, so what I've done here is I've just pulled out the door seal. It just pulls down off this metal bar here. It's quite easy. And now you can see I can actually get into this gap here down where this panel is. So I think what I'm going to do is run a cable inside here all the way down to underneath the dashboard, and then I can run it along to behind where the radio is. Right, so I've positioned the mic up here. It's nice and discreet, and then I've run the cable down the inside of the pillar here. To get this off, there are some plastic clips that hold this in, and they have little teeth on them, so it's actually really difficult to lever this off. It's very easy to break. My suggestion would be actually that you don't bother and you just run it down the gap here, because you can just about get in here without taking this off. And inside here there are actually some little clips that you can attach the cable to stop it from rattling. So what I've done is I've run it down there, and you can see it coming out here. And now what I've done is I've removed this lower fascia panel here. There's one screw just above the OBD port, and then the rest of it is all just held in with these little clips that you can see here, so you can actually just lever it off. So what I'm going to do is run this cable down here and then just feed the end of it round to the back of where the radio is, and there should be enough extra cable to meet on the other end where the Bluetooth module goes into the back of the radio. Okay, I've now got the mic cable attached in, if you can see in there. There wasn't quite as much cable as I would have liked, so it's a little bit tight. So what I've done is I've added some tape on the join where the plug goes into the socket, and hopefully that will stop it from pulling loose. Right, so I've just done a bit of a tidy up of the cables in the back here to try and keep everything as firm as possible. I've attached the Bluetooth module to the wiring a bit further up here, and I've used these reusable cable ties, so if I do need to move it or change it later, it's not the end of the world. I've also tried to tape this wire that goes to the USB ports just into a corner here, and also the mic cable here. I've made a little hole here and actually just cable tied that there, and that should mean that nothing rattles in here. Right, so I've just reconnected everything temporarily, and I'm now just giving it a quick test. I had to enter the radio code again, obviously, because I'd taken the radio out and the power had been lost. So you can hear now I'm playing music from the auxiliary input via Bluetooth. Sounds pretty good. One thing I have noticed is if there's no sound playing, or if it's very quiet and you turn it up, there is this digital noise, and that's kind of annoying, but it's not the end of the world, and it's only when the volume's really high. I mean, that's full volume now. So if you just turn your volume up on your device as high as it'll go, then actually you can keep the volume turned down on the radio, and then you don't notice the noise. Okay, now what I've done is I've used my phone to make a recording using the microphone, and this is what that sounds like. Okay, I'm testing the audio input for the Bluetooth device using the microphone up in the corner of the window here. This is what somebody would hear if they were on the phone with me and I was driving. So not the best quality in the world, but it's certainly quite clear, so I don't think anyone would have any trouble hearing what I was saying. So I think that's fine for a phone call. It doesn't have to be super high quality. Alright, so everything's back in place and it is all working. However, there is one annoying issue, which is that when you put a phone in and it starts charging, the radio disappears. So there's obviously some kind of interference somewhere along the line between the charger, the USB ports, and the radio. So I don't know what the culprit is, and I don't really know if there's any way to fix that. But in my particular case, it's not the end of the world, because I don't really actually listen to the radio all that much. I tend to listen to Spotify or podcasts, so I don't think it's going to affect my life all that badly. And if I really do want to listen to the radio, I can just unplug the charger from the USB port there, and then it'll all work fine. So that's all successfully installed, and we have Bluetooth on the radio, and we have the USB sockets in the glove box. So that is job done.